Hello everyone. Aloha Friday. Hey Pops, how you doing, man? Yes, I am doing better. I am doing better. One last procedure on Tuesday on Oahu, and I'll be back to normal hopefully. So anyway, I appreciate you guys jumping on tonight. It is Aloha Friday here in Hawaii, and we so appreciate you guys. We got a special guest tonight, Brendan Schwartz, candidate for the Congressional District Two, which is the rural areas of Oahu and all of the neighbor islands. Uh, you know, I we make this platform available for everyone. I think it's quite unfair that the mainstream media will select their quote leading candidates and then give them all the media time, interviews, forums, uh, debates, and yet there's this stable of other candidates that are running for various offices, whether it's the local level, state level, or congressional levels. And I, for one, am interested in all of them. And we can read the Civil Beat interviews on all the candidates that chose to participate. I can't believe some of the candidates did not participate. But if you go to Civil Beat, there's the questionnaires for all of the candidates, and most responded, but some didn't. And you can get a good feel of the platforms of these candidates. So I'm excited tonight because Brendan Schwartz, until he reached out to me because I had said on all of our shows when we do candidates, anyone that wants to come on our show, the platform is yours for an hour. And he reached out, and I was gladly accepted and said, "Of course, man. We want to." I've never spoken to him. This was all done through messaging or face or email. But I am curious to hear what these non-leading candidates, if you listen to the mainstream media, uh, categorize these people. I mean, I give anyone credit. Anyone that puts their name in the ballot, I give them credit. Stepping outside of their box, their comfort zone, and and trying to improve the communities that they live in. Brendan Schwartz was born on Oahu at Tripler Hospital, military brat, traveled the world with his parents, and he's back here now. And so I'm looking forward to a very exciting night listening to what Mr. Schwartz has to say. But before we get into that, I did want to discuss the reason I told you guys, right? I played a roller coaster. Thanks for the comments about the hair, guys. I'm wearing my military do. I had to have this haircut for many, many, many years. Um, I do the roller coaster intro when we have a roller coaster day, right? You guys by now have all heard about the cluster popping out of Hickam Elementary School. That came out. I saw it in a letter this morning. I posted on Facebook. I downloaded the picture, posted it up, and I quoted what the State Department of Education said, right? It's a cluster is three or more students, blah, blah, blah. But the exposure happened in school, so they're not required to quarantine. Of course, they ain't required to wear masks, right? How you think this thing is spreading? And very, very nonchalant, just blah blah blah. And I know of a school here in the North Shore. My good friend. I'm not going to mention names. There's been positives there. I've been seeing Facebook posts from parents that are sharing their schools are uh, have identified positive cases in their school. This is just 4 days, guys, since school opened, and in some cases only three. This is exactly what we said would happen, right? We all knew it would happen, but not one peep from the DOH, not one peep from the DOE, not one peep from Batman and Robin, Ige and Green. Not one, zero, not no concern, right? No, the news was about the Backstreet Boys or whatever because they named today after them. I love the Backstreet Boys; they're pretty good guys, but really, why aren't we recognizing doctors, nurses, employees of hospitals? Why are we celebrating them who's killing themselves taking care of our patients? No, Backstreet Boys gets the lead. I'm frustrated. Obviously, this morning I got a reporter from KITV reached out, messaged me, asked me to call him, so I did. We spoke. He wanted to know the source of the letter. I said, that letter came out this morning. I was trying to find the original post. I couldn't find it. I said, but it's legitimate. I mean, it sounded like it came from a parent. He said, well, I called the Department of Health and they don't know anything about it. I said, are you surprised? I told the reporter, are you surprised? Did you call the Department of Education? They're giving me the runaround. I called the school. They said the principal's not available. I called the Department of Health. They said no one's available to answer my question. Department of Education. And how can that be, right? We all know the dangers of schools. We all know the dangers. Well, they should know, right? We got doctors, a lieutenant governor, for God's sake. The experts all told us, be careful. The surges are going to blow up at schools because no masks. I'm not surprised. I'm pissed off because it's like, so what? Kids got to be in school. We're not going to put the mask mandate back. We're just going to let them get exposed and let them go home. And this is the part. Now, the Department of Education says if you get exposed in class, which is what the cluster was identified, then they don't need to quarantine. They don't need to test. They can just go back to school. So if they didn't get it on day one, they can get it on day 2 or day 3. See, this is, to me, it's criminal. It's negligence. It's gross negligence. But I'm frustrated because no one talks about it. No one, right? Except here on this show, this little thing we call Facebook Live. I'd be going nuts if I was a parent right now with kids in school. I would be so upset. I would not even send my kid to school. And I know many of you cannot do that, but I regardless, I would not send my kids to a breeding ground of COVID. Yes, my kid would wear a mask. Yes, but if the rest of the kids aren't wearing masks, what good is that? So I'm very, very, very disappointed. So anyway, the reporter tells me, he goes, I'm beginning to think that this is fake. I said, pal, I don't know how long you've been doing this, but this ain't fake. This is totally expected. And I will bet you $100 that this letter is legitimate. And because the DOH says they don't know what's happening, that to me is criminal. If I'm the governor right now, I would be livid. But of course not, right? It's Ige. Josh Green basically said it's safe. We shouldn't be masking our kids anyway. So they're not going to respond because what is happening is exactly what they was trying to portray that wouldn't happen. Right? They were convincing everyone that it was safe and we knew this would happen. This is just the beginning, folks. The problem is our state doesn't provide the information. They're not going to reveal, right? Thank God we get members that are providing these letters to share with the public. Otherwise, there is no way for us to know what's going on. The system is broken. And, I always say transparency, engagement by the public and the community is key. And we're not getting that. We're not getting that at all. Everything is hidden. Everything is kept from us. And it's extremely frustrating for myself. Uh, and again, right, the reporter automatically went to say he was starting to believe that it was a fake letter because apparently he hasn't been working with this state government long enough to understand that they're not transparent, they're not open, and they definitely ain't competent, in my opinion. And I tell you right now, when the head doesn't know what the tail is doing, and vice versa, we end up with the kind of government we have. So anyway, we got Brendan here. I am excited. Brendan Schwartz.
Can you hear
Can you
me?
hear me? I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you great. How's everything going today?
Going pretty cool, man. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we were just talking about. We'll have you introduce yourself in a bit, but before you came on, I was sharing with the village. We call this the village, and our villagers that, mainstream media has decided to pick their leading candidates in all the races, and they have decided that we are going to put these leading candidates out in the public's eye, whether it's forums or debates or interviews or whatever. And as you know, I'm a candidate as well. I've won elections, I've lost elections, I've done it, and I think it's so unfair when the media puts the leading candidates in front of the people. How you're just really uh, doing a disservice to the public who should be learning about all the candidates. So that's just what I prepped our villagers with. So with that, oh my, Tyson is saying if you could turn your phone horizontal so we could see the widescreen. I don't know if you can do that once you start.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it
So,
won't do it. That's fine. That's fine. You're good, man. I'm gonna turn the screen over to you, and you can go ahead and introduce yourself, um, and give us your story until the day you decided that, I'm gonna run for Congress.
yeah,
I'd be here.
absolutely. Thank you so much. So my name's Brendan Schultz. I'm a progressive, and I'm running for Congress in the Democratic primary for Hawaii's second congressional district because I believe that our islands need a representative in the halls of power who's going to fight for people, planet, and peace. The sort of three big policies of my campaign are Medicare for all, a Green New Deal, and ending foreign wars. For a bit of background on me, I was born on Oahu. Grew up partially in Aiea. I'm a military kid, so like most military kids, I bounced around the United States and lived abroad for a little bit. Professionally, I've dedicated my entire career to working as a humanitarian aid worker and international development specialist. So I'm the executive director of a small nonprofit named United by Love, and we implement interethnic youth development programs in post-conflict communities. So primarily Southeastern Europe, countries like Macedonia, Albania, Kosovo, Bosnia, and Serbia, which are most famous for the events that took place in the 1990s, the unfortunate genocides that took place. So we work there to make sure that that never happens again, that people can live in cohesive communities. And so I live in Hawaii for 6 months out of the year, and the other 6 months I'm deployed typically to Eastern Europe, but sometimes other places in the world as well. What made me want to run was I was very frustrated. I mean, our islands are in many crises. So we have a housing crisis. We have the worst homelessness rate in the United States. 60% of people are working poor in Hawaii now. We have a public education system that is defunct, and it's not because of the teachers. That it's not the fault of the teachers or the staff. It's the fault of the politicians who aren't channeling funding into the system. And I just said that I had enough. That when the seat opened up less than 100 days before the primary, I was looking to see who was filing, reading the civil beat, reading some media sources, and I wasn't satisfied with the options on the ballot. So I decided that I would go out, collect 25 signatures, put up a website, start a campaign, and run myself. And it's not about winning necessarily, but it's about giving the people of Hawaii a unabashed progressive option on the ballot who's refusing corporate and special interest money in all of its forms, and really giving that option to the voters. So at least once they receive their ballots in the mail, they have that as a choice.
Awesome. My first run for county council, not Congress, not Congress, but for county council here in Kauai. That was exactly why I ran. I, in my mind, knew I could not beat these veteran politicians because just how it was. But like I told my wife and my family, I'm not going to win, but I'm going to get my message out. This will be my vehicle to get the message out to the people so they understand what's going on. They understand where the problems are. And I was right. I didn't win, but I was also right because I got the message out. And I appreciate you for doing this. As I said earlier before you came on, I give a lot of credit to those that get their name on the ballot and put themselves out to go ahead and serve the people. So really appreciate you doing that. You heard me talk a little bit about the mainstream media. We've never had one of anyone like yourself come on the show. How does it feel to be a candidate? You sound very intelligent. You got world experience, but how does it feel when you turn on the news or you go on the internet and you see KITV or Hawaii News Now or KGMB? We will have the three leading candidates. How does it make you as a person who has made that decision to run, to put yourself out in the open, to go jump in the fishbowl so everybody can see you? How does that make you feel?
I mean, I have to say it's a bit frustrating. So I understand that there's limited space on a debate stage, for example. But really, I was thinking to myself last night and sort of reflecting on how the mainstream media in our state has covered my candidacy. And it's not only my candidacy, it's also the candidacy of three other people in my race who have had almost zero media attention whatsoever, despite running active campaigns. And I was reflecting, and I just thought to myself, I've never seen anything like this before. I had never seen sort of the mainstream media is, of course, always biased. Most of the mainstream outlets are corporate, and so they have an incentive to sort of diminish the voice of non-corporate candidates. But I really wasn't expecting at the beginning of this race. I knew we wouldn't be treated fairly by the mainstream media, but I wasn't expecting the level of unfairness that I received, even from certain news outlets who previously I had a substantial amount of respect for. So, I mean, I understand that, at this point, for example, in the race, we're at the election, ballots have been mailed out. If there's going to be candidate debates or candidate forums, perhaps it should be narrowed down to the top few candidates. And there's this question, though, at that point when a media outlet's going to make that decision, how is that determined? How is it determined who a top candidate is? And so if you take the governor's race, for example, there have been a lot of polls in the governor's race, and I believe there have been a few polls where every option on the ballot has been listed as a choice that a person could answer for the poll. There has not been a single poll in my race where every option has been presented to voters. In fact, the only poll that was provided was done by Hawaii News Now in the Civil Beat, and in that poll, it was only two of the candidates who were provided as options, and the results came back is about 63% of people saying they were undecided or they didn't want to vote for either of those two options. So the clearest thing from that poll was that the vast majority of people were sort of unsatisfied with the options that they were given by the pollster. And I guess that poll has been used to justify other mainstream outlets deciding to exclude the four candidates, including myself, in this race. But that's not fair, and that's not why we have a media. And sort of what upsets me even more is, I guess you could expect this from corporate media outlets, outlets that clearly have an agenda. But what frustrates me even more is sort of the way that some nonprofit media outlets have responded to this campaign, in pretty much every single campaign in Hawaii in this election cycle, and doing that and saying that, we're only going to have the top few candidates for an interview or a candidate forum. And I run a nonprofit. And if I was to use my nonprofit to benefit my candidacy, that would be a clear violation of federal law. I'm not allowed to do that. I know there's very clear things that I would not be able to say when acting as the executive director of the organization I run. However, there's nonprofit newsrooms here in Hawaii who've decided that the IRS guidelines for if you're going to have a candidate forum or if you're going to have any sort of election event, you have to invite everyone, not the top candidates, not who you deem appropriate, not there's no filter, everyone. The IRS rules are very clear on that, and a lot of organizations have decided that rule is optional. And so as a person who works in a nonprofit myself, I find that to be a little bit abusive of the nonprofit system that we have. The reason why we have nonprofits is for the public interest, and it's not up to a nonprofit media outlet to decide who is of the public interest. That's up for the people to decide.
Yeah, I was always under the impression that when networks, radio, TV, I thought it was an FCC regulation, and it just dawned on me now as you were speaking that if you gave one candidate an opportunity to speak, then you have to give that same opportunity to all candidates running. Um, as far as the polls, you're right, 63% undecided or not voting for either of the candidates. To add another four names to that poll, it's the same. What's the difference? There's the postage is the same. Um, the stage, as far as the stage not being big enough, we've had forums here on Kauai when we've had 14 candidates and we've had them on stage at the same. It can be done. I'm just saying that I wish the media would. What even bothers me is when the media endorses candidates. That drives me bonkers. When you're, I just cannot see how an unbiased media outlet such as a newspaper can come out and openly, publicly endorse any candidate for any office. I always thought that was kind of strange, but what this really does is, and that's why again I give you credit for running, is because it really deters or discourages good quality people from making the decision to run because they know the battle is hard. It's an uphill battle, and you don't even have a shot at sharing a stage with any of these other leading candidates and answering questions for the public to get to know who you are.
Mhm.
It's just not right. But
And I mean, it leads to mistrust in the media. I was listening to news a couple of weeks ago, and there was a poll done that said that only 15% of Americans trust the media, believe that the media is an unbiased source of information. And when you have that in society, it's not a good thing. It's not a good thing for the vast majority of people to distrust these information channels. And I have to say as well, this is for our campaign, as far as media coordination, it's only been an issue with outlets that are based out of Honolulu and Oahu. I've had no issue coming on community radio multiple times on Kauai. You were happy to have me on your show. I have had no issue with the public broadcasting station on the Big Island. I went to a candidate forum on Maui. I went to a candidate forum on the Big Island where everyone was invited. And it's just sort of it's very strange. Like why is it only these outlets that are based out of Honolulu which are trying to exclude people? And then again, looking at sort of other congressional races, I sort of look to my peers since I'm pretty young myself, and there's a few other young people running throughout the United States in this cycle, and sort of seeing what they're up to and what they're doing with their campaigns. They haven't had this issue at all. There was a campaign that Maxwell Frost was in. He's, again, Gen Z, like myself, one of the first Gen Z candidates for Congress in the country. And there was a stage with, I think it was like 7 or 8 people on it. So if they can fit 7 or 8 people on a stage in Florida, why can't we do that in Hawaii?
yeah, well, it's just an unfortunate reality here, and something's gonna have to give, something's gonna have to change, and so let's get to the issues. I again, well, I'll turn the screen over to you and give us your top issues and your plans on how we. Yeah, it's a rough time right now in our country. It is. It hilarious, and I'm watching the news, and they're saying the job report came in, and we're doing extremely well, uh, and yet we're in a recession. Uh, you can play with the numbers all you want, and if you're going to judge our economic standing based on a jobs report, you're not looking at the whole picture. We are in a recession. We've gone through 2 cycles. Uh, we're in a recession, and our leaders, well, I shouldn't say all, but most of our leaders are trying to convince us otherwise. But what's your platform? What's your issues, your top issues, and what are your thoughts about how you're going to help solve these things?
Absolutely. I mean, the thing is, I have to say it before sort of launching into the solutions, we call them in our campaigns, or the policy proposals that we have, is that normal countries do not function the way that the United States and Hawaii is functioning right now. That normal governments work to solve problems for ordinary people, not to preserve the power and wealth of the most elite in society, which our government here in Hawaii and at the federal level has seemingly decided that that's the main purpose. So we have a lot of crises here in Hawaii and throughout the United States. Like you said, we're in a recession. 60% of households in Hawaii are ALICE, which is asset limited but employed. And this is not normal. So we need bold policies to solve the various crises that we have in the United States. And so sort of our 5 big policies for our campaign is to establish universal health care in the United States by expanding the Medicare system to cover every person in the United States, to ensure that our islands and world remain habitable by having a Green New Deal. And for our campaign, that means transitioning to renewable energy for transportation over the next 15 years and renewable energy for the entire economy by 2050, as well as investing $5 trillion over the next 10 years into renewable energy and public transportation infrastructure throughout the United States to end foreign wars. So I grew up as a military kid. One of my earliest memories is of my mother being deployed to Iraq. She was a psychiatrist in the U.S. Navy. Fortunately, she came back safe. She's now a civilian doctor. But I don't want other children to have the same experience that I had. I see the Iraq war is one of the greatest crimes against humanity of the 21st century. Don't want to live in a country which is engaging in acts like that. So we need to end foreign wars from an ethical perspective, also an economical perspective, since we spend about $1 trillion each year on defense in this country, and that's money that could be going to other activities. We're perfectly well defended. The United States hasn't been invaded since 1812. And then to sustain Social Security through a wealth tax on the top 0.1% of households. So we're speaking of households in excess of $40 million in assets. The Social Security system is scheduled to go bankrupt. The trust funds will go bankrupt within the next 10 years. We're the wealthiest nation in the world. We're perfectly able to sustain the Social Security system. We just have to put effort towards doing that. And then to protect and expand unions by passing the PRO Act. I see unions as the greatest asset that working class, middle class Americans have to uplift themselves. And we've seen over the past 30 years, the pretty much decimation of private sector unions throughout the United States. And so we need to reinvigorate the labor movement, ensure that unions have the protection that they deserve when organizing.
Let me just real quick. Liz, you're right. It's Schultz. It's not Schwartz. It was a typo. I screwed up. I apologize. I cannot correct it right now while we're on the stream, but I will definitely correct it when we're done. I apologize, Brendan. I Schwartz. What the heck was I thinking? I don't know. It's
So
been a
yeah,
long
it's fine. It's like the least Hawaii name you could imagine. So it gets messed up here all the time. Like
yeah.
it's fine.
Yeah, so it is Schultz. I'm sorry. It is Schultz. She's looking at her ballot right now, which means she hasn't voted. So an opportunity right there, you know. Um, so obviously running on the Democrat ticket, correct?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Um, oh gosh, I just had another one of those brain farts. Um, the first, what was your first priority that you just said? I was so
Medicare for all.
engaged. Medicare. Right now, uh, our entire healthcare system is upside down. Uh, right now, on this island, we have kupuna. We have our elderly having to make decisions between food or medication, and I'm sure we're not alone. I'm sure this happens throughout the country. Uh, what's going on? How can the most wealthiest country in the world, and yet we watch our seniors starve or get sick because they can't afford both? How is that happening? Why does that happen?
Well, it happens because we have a for-profit driven healthcare system. And we're the only country in the developed world with a system like that. Other countries, like our neighbors to the north, Canada, they effectively have a Medicare for all type system. It's not called that in particular, but the government is the payer for insurance. If you're sick, you go to the hospital, you get taken care of. That's how it works. And that's how it works in England. That's how it works in France. I remember when I lived in Botswana, I was working in Botswana for a little while in the Kalahari Desert. The Botswana government, Botswana's not a rich country, but in any way, shape, or form, but they make sure, regardless of what ailment you have, that you get the best possible care. I had friends the Botswana government would put them on a plane and take them to Western Europe, from the southern hemisphere to the northern hemisphere to get the best possible cancer treatments that money could buy. And we've decided in this country, the powers that be have decided that we're going to have a private for-profit health insurance system. And that doesn't work. It doesn't work in many ways. It doesn't work when people can't afford care. And it doesn't work if you live in a rural community. If you live on Kauai or you live on Molokai, or places on the Big Island, it's not profitable, regardless of how wealthy your community is, to build a hospital in those places. That if you're a for-profit medical company, you're going to be looking at places like Honolulu or San Francisco or Seattle to build a hospital at, because that's where you can make the most money. That's where you have the most patients. And so I believe that healthcare is a human right, and we need to transition to a public system like every other country in the industrialized world. We have a wonderful public healthcare system for Kapuna. It's called the Medicare system, and we just need to expand that system to include everybody.
That is such a monster across the country that it's just amazing how Well, Congress is Congress. Very little change in Congress. You look at the people that are there have been there for 40 years, 50 years, and they're really controlling what happens in our country. What are your thoughts on term limits for Congress? I know that topic comes up, and usually during election time, everybody supports term limits, and then once they get in office, then they change their mind, and they don't think they should have term limits. But what are your thoughts on term limits at the congressional level?
I support term limits. I do. But I think when we look at sort of electoral reform and what electoral reform is most pressing, the greatest issue that I'm going to try and champion if elected is to establish a public financing system for federal candidates in Congress, so in the House and the Senate. So we have a public financing system here in Hawaii. It's not the best, but it does at least provide some support for candidates who are willing to refuse special interest money. New York City has a really good public financing system. The state of Connecticut also has a pretty good one. There's a few other states that have established them for statewide office, and I think that we need a public financing system at the federal level. One of the greatest challenges for our campaign is that we're being outspent when you include outside mainland super PAC money. We're being outspent about 1,000 to 1. And of course, like when people get their ballot, I hope that most people are going to do research. They're not going to make their decision based on a Facebook ad they saw or a negative political ad on TV that was funded by some mainland donor. But unfortunately, the reality is that in the vast majority of elections, the candidate who spends the most is the candidate who wins. And so just from this experience in running on a very limited budget, on a grassroots budget, not taking that special interest money, we need an alternative option for candidates like myself across the United States. So looking at that, in addition, currently members of Congress are allowed to trade individual stocks, and that is not appropriate in any way, shape, or form. It's obviously a conflict of interest that you have individuals, even in the party that I'm running in, individuals like Nancy Pelosi, who trade massive amounts of stock before a government decision is announced, either benefiting or opposing a particular industry or company. And so those are sort of the more pressing electoral reforms I see that need to be championed immediately.
Yeah, that actually should be criminal. When these people have that advantage, and a lot of congressional or Congress people go to Congress and become millionaires while they're in Congress, and it's really not right. The public funding. Hawaii has a partial public funding system where, you know, uh, you if you agree to the public funding, the opponents, they don't, right? They have that option, so they can go out and raise as much money as they want, versus the candidate who chooses to do public funding and they're limited. How far fetched is the idea that all elections at every level would be public funded elections? Every candidate gets the same amount of money. No more outside money. I mean, what's happening in Hawaii this election is amazing. The amount of dark money, super PAC money, coming into our state and running these negative campaigns. I've never seen anything like it. I mean, I've seen these types of tactics run, but this year for some reason it's like you cannot stop. It's happening constantly on TV, and yesterday my mailbox was full of negative postcards, big ones too. And I know the cost. These things cost money to send out. I can't even afford to send out a mailing, a regular mail out to our islands, not much less a nice high quality colored brochure. So
Yeah.
total public funding, I think, is the only way we're going to allow, or at least equalize the or level the playing field for candidates across the country.
I agree. I think that's sort of a very long-term process, though, since unfortunately the Supreme Court ruled in Citizens United that that's a constitutionally protected freedom of speech. So to change that, we'd either need to change the composition of the court and have a new court case come about, or to adopt changes to the Constitution, both of which I support, of course. It just would be a much longer process than trying to get at least a public funding option on the ballot for people running immediately. But even in this race, there's been $1 million of super PAC dark money that was thrown into this race over the past 3 weeks. Um, that's insane. That's 500 times what our campaign has raised alone. And so it's just the people who are, of course, people are spending this amount of money because there's a return on investment. And then you look at the governor's race, you look at all of the state senate and state house races, and then the county races. Like the one of the mayoral counts on Maui has raised over 350 grand for a Maui mayor's seat. And so there's it's just ridiculous. But I agree with you. Over the long term, there's really no way to reinvigorate civic engagement and have elections be productive experiences and move society forward unless we pretty much ban all of that excessive funding and go to a public financing system for every candidate.
Yeah, I mean, I hope I'm alive to see that day. Unfortunately, I don't think I will be. I think it's just that the structure is so tight that it's going to be hard to break away. You mentioned the new Green New Deal. A lot of controversy, a lot of people on both sides of the issue. A lot of people feel that it's unrealistic to think that we're going to completely get off of fossil fuels. Yet it is something that though the Democratic Party has been pushing for quite a while now, and is obviously the separation, the party, the Congress is become a party centric organization, right? I mean, no one thinks in the. I shouldn't say there are some that will vote on issue and not party, but for people like myself who kind of pay attention, it's really the party, right? It's you vote the party line. How do you think? I mean, how does that? Do you think we will ever get to a point where Congress people can actually have a civil discussion and genuinely focus on an outcome that's going to benefit the people? Do you think that's even possible?
I think it is sort of how I've thought about going about sort of inter-party dynamics if I'm elected is that even though I'm running as the Democratic ticket, if elected, I would operate much more as an independent in Congress, so much more akin to the way like Bernie Sanders has operated. So Bernie Sanders, for example, in the Senate caucuses with the Democratic Party. So I would caucus with the Democratic Party, but I wouldn't join any other caucuses, just the Democratic Party, because that's essentially how you get committee assignments. And then I would look at individual pieces of legislation and vote based on how I feel, it would help the people here in Hawaii and people across the United States. The reason why most candidates, when they get to Congress, don't operate in that manner is that it's not in their best interest for their careers. So if a candidate operates in that manner, it will not make leadership within their party the happiest. It will not make donors the happiest. And so that's why you see most people when they get to Congress just sort of following the party line. But if elected, I would aim not to do that, to evaluate bills individually and evaluate and work with people across the aisle.
Awesome. Yeah, that's. I mean, I hope that more people do that because I mean that's something the country needs right now, especially. I'm gonna pop in some questions just as they roll up. I don't know if you can see the comments, probably not on your phone, but Heidi's asking, would you consider debt forgiveness for doctors and nurses to motivate them to stay in their field or enter medical, or for people to enter medical fields?
Yep. On our website, one of the policies that we have listed is forgiving debt of public servants. So that includes anything from firefighters to police officers to teachers. We can also include physicians in that, especially physicians who dedicate themselves to underserved communities. So there's already some state programs. I know California has a program, for example, to forgive the debt of doctors who work in rural communities, since there's a deficit of doctors in rural communities in that state. And we can adopt a program on the federal level to do similar.
Awesome. Yeah, now I mean, the situation with nurses and doctors and hospital staffs, with the COVID, it's just been a heart wrenching sight for many of us. I mean, I think many of us have families or friends that are nurses, and we got a lot of villagers here on our show that work in the hospitals, and it's just hard to watch and sad to see that we just pretty much take them for granted, and it's so unfortunate because they are struggling right now. A couple of the big issues I'd love to get your thoughts on: Roe versus Wade, recent Supreme Court rulings. I'm sure you get asked that all the time, and the whole gun law decisions. What are your thoughts? Let's start with Roe versus Wade.
Yeah, so with Roe versus Wade, I fundamentally support a woman's right to choose, and I think we need to legislate that into federal law. One of the failures of the Democratic Party and the Democratic establishment over the past 50 years nearly was they sort of just relied on that court precedent. They never bothered to pass legislation in Congress to actually codify a woman's right to choose into federal law, which is why we are currently in the predicament that we're in right now. So that's a failure of the Democratic Party that I think Democratic leadership needs to own up to. And if elected, I'm going to be working to pass that and working to vocally voice opposition to people even within the Democratic Party, since there's some Democratic members of Congress who oppose passing such legislation. And sort of the Roe versus Wade question gets to a much larger question about the Supreme Court, which again, the Supreme Court in the United States, like many other constitutional democracies, has a lot more authority than its sort of parallel sister and brother courts in other countries. In most other countries, their sort of equivalent of a Supreme Court is much more advisory and cannot just strike down laws willy-nilly. And I think that we've seen not only in the past few months, but also if you look back to decisions like Bush versus Gore in front of the Supreme Court, where they essentially overturned a presidential election, that the Supreme Court has overstepped its bounds a few times. And so on the federal level, we need to reconcile that. I think that we need more people in Congress who are willing to say the court doesn't have authority to take certain actions. And then I also think we need to expand the Supreme Court and have term limits on the Supreme Court. I don't think if you're appointed, you should have a seat for life. Perhaps 18 years, I think, is more than long enough, is an appropriate amount of time. So we need to look at all of those options to ensure that we don't have a Supreme Court that is reactionary in nature, that's just holding back progress in our society and overstepping its bounds.
Do you think we should increase the number of justices on the Supreme Court?
Yep. Yep, I support that. I think that the way that Republicans appointed the last three Supreme Court justices, three of which who lied under oath saying they would not overturn Roe versus Wade. Firstly, those three justices should be impeached. They're probably not going to be, but at the very least, we should be adding justices to the Supreme Court, which is not against the Constitution in any way. The Constitution doesn't specify how many justices should be on the Supreme Court. The Constitution also puts the Supreme Court in a bit more of a limited role than it has been interpreted presently. So I do support adding justices.
All right. The other big issue is the ruling on the guns, the gun legislation. You know, in Hawaii we have probably the toughest gun laws in the country. Definitely one of the toughest, if not the toughest. I definitely support the right to own a gun. I also believe that there are certain people in our community that should not have guns. No doubt about that. But the way Hawaii is structured, and even as an avid gun guy, I don't think it's too strict. I don't think a mandatory uh, background check. I don't think making sure that you're mentally fit. I don't think any of these things are a huge issue when it comes to go get a gun. And I know some states where I've watched firsthand while I was in sporting goods stores on the mainland where people walk in, show them the driver's license, they do a quick background check right at the counter, and they walk out with the gun. What are your thoughts on the existing gun laws? I guess I should say nationwide. What do you believe should Congress do as it relates to gun safety, or do you believe it should be delegated at the state level?
I think that Congress needs to take a much more predominant role into legislating gun laws. And so we live in the United States. I've lived all over the United States. Hawaii is not necessarily a gun-loving state, but many of the mainland states are, and it is a right listed in the Constitution. Under some interpretations, of course, the Constitution's a bit vague about that right, but at least it's been interpreted that citizens have a right to own a gun. So that's sort of one of the aspects of this, one of the cultural aspects of gun culture in America that makes us different from pretty much every other country in the world. I think we have the most guns per capita of any place in the world. We have almost more guns than people in this country. And so we can still look abroad. So sort of bringing in my international perspective, there's 2 countries in Europe that allow you to own semi-automatic firearms. Those countries are Switzerland and Austria. And so you're allowed to own a pretty decently sized and powerful weapon, but they follow the policies that are proposed by the vast majority of the Democratic Party, and supported by the vast majority of Americans. Policies like universal background checks, policies like red flag laws, policies like you're not allowed to own an automatic weapon, things of that sort. And so those are common sense things. So at least if we're going to have those weapons, there should at least be a universal background check process. Again, it's strange because the vast majority of Americans support these policies. Even the vast majority of Republicans support these policies. It's just that the gun lobby doesn't support these policies, and the gun lobby lobbies Congress to make sure that none of this can get passed. But if elected, I'm going to work to ensure that we at least have universal background checks and red flag laws. And then another clear aspect of this is that if we're going to have so many guns across the country, we at least need universal health care, mental health care, because whenever we read about the atrocities that take place mostly on the mainland as far as mass shootings are concerned, there's always a mental health component to it. And so if we're going to have guns everywhere, we at least need to have mental health care in this country to prevent atrocities like that.
Absolutely, 100%. I think even at our state level, resources for mental health, it really isn't. I always say it's not a money issue. Yeah, it's a priority issue. If you believe that we have a mental health issue in our state, by golly, do something about it, right? Put the resources where it needs to go. Everybody talks about mental health. Everybody talks about homeless and houseless, especially during election time. Everybody talks about these problems that's been around for decades. But what happens every year? Nothing. Nothing happens every year. We
Nothing.
fentanyl. This is what bothers me. Fentanyl is causing a lot of problems throughout our country. It's definitely causing a problem in our state. It's definitely causing a problem here on our island. And the government comes out, and don't get me wrong, I'm not minimizing the dangers of monkeypox, but uh, they come out with a declare an emergency against monkeypox. So where the hell is the emergency declaration for fentanyl? Why aren't we moving resources to stop this damn fentanyl from coming into our country? I think that is my problem with what's happening. I mean, we all know, everyone knows. Like you even mentioned about the universal background checks, right? Everyone knows. I don't know what is it, maybe 80% of the people living on this planet or in this country support it.
Hmm.
Absolutely, except you take out the politicians, and take out the lobby, and just talk to normal people. Probably closer to 90% of the people would agree that universal background checks is at the minimum something we should do. But it's understanding, it's confusing how this, the wheels of politics take over. But as it relates to fentanyl, why aren't we declaring emergency against all of these other problems that are systemic, that are all across our country, homelessness and so forth? Yeah, I mean,
Well, because
God,
those people don't have a voice and those people don't have power. I mean, it's not a question of money. Our government has ample financial resources. It's a question of where we put those resources. So the amount of money that would be needed to solve homelessness across the United States, depending on what study you're looking at, is between 55 and 65 billion dollars. which is, of course, a lot of money. But that's also about the same amount of money that our country has given in military aid to Ukraine since the start of Russia's invasion, which I'm not in any way opposed to sending humanitarian aid to Ukraine. In fact, if I don't win this election, I'll probably be relocating to Ukraine as a humanitarian aid worker. So I certainly support humanitarian aid going to Ukraine. But $55 billion, or the Democrats the other day in Congress, the corporate Democrats, that is, just passed a microchip bill that's essentially a subsidy to the very profitable microchip computer industry to establish factories in this country. That's the equivalent of $50 billion. And there was no universal town halls. There was no debate. There was no, CNN, Fox News roundtable to discuss where are we going to get this money from. Just the lobbyists support it, and so it was passed. And people from both parties, the corporate politicians from both parties, went along with it. So it's not a question of resources, but same thing with fentanyl and the opioid epidemic. Like, my family's been impacted by the opioid epidemic. I've had family members who have unfortunately passed away. But it's a health issue that impacts primarily, poor and working class people across the country. And so the powers that be in Congress are not very concerned. So it's again, and I again, with my candidacy, we're trying to change that. But when it comes to changing that for all 500 some people in Congress, that's a very hard sort of mentality change to make, or sort of electoral revolution that we need to have in this country to truly have a government that's working for individuals and people and ordinary citizens, as opposed to the elite.
Yeah, it's so blatantly obvious that our Congress today works for corporate America, works for the rich. I mean, it's just, and I don't care which party, it doesn't matter. It's happening on both sides of the aisle, and it's just frustrating to watch. And it's unfortunate that more people don't get to hear candidates like yourself, um, and be able to really understand what's going on. Your insights, your knowledge of what's happening is very, very clear. Um, and it's just, I'm actually enjoying this discussion. I
Good to
really
hear.
am. uh, what else is going on? What else? Big issues. Oh yeah, I did want to the green new the new Green New Deal,
Green New Deal. Yep.
Green New Deal. Uh, Expand on that, and is it possible? Is that something that we can truly achieve, or is that are we too optimistic, or are we can we make it happen? Seriously.
I mean, sort of one of the wonderful things about climate change, in a way, it's hard to say this, but climate change doesn't care if you're a Democrat or a Republican. If your house is next to the ocean, climate change is an issue that's going to impact you. If you live in Florida, or if you live in Hawaii, or if you live on the coast of Texas, or even if you live away from the sea, if you live inland in the desert, if you live in Nebraska, it's going to impact you. And so I think we're seeing a conscious change across the country in the electorate in demanding solutions, especially since climate change is now a present tense issue. We're having climate emergencies across the United States, and I think there's the political will to mobilize the United States and our government for a response to climate change, a response that's akin to how we responded to World War II, which is what we need, because this is an existential threat. This is an immense threat, and it's going to keep getting worse unless we do anything. And so I think there is political will. Our sort of proposal for the Green New Deal is a bit scaled back, in an odd way to put it. It's a bit more conservative than some of the more liberal Green New Deal proposals that call for much more funding and much more regulations. Our campaign's not calling for that. I think that $5 trillion over the next 10 years is perfectly reasonable to transform our electricity grid and make sure that we have decent public transportation across the United States, which for your viewers in rural Hawaii and in Kauai, for example, you might be saying, oh, well, this Honolulu boy is telling me about public transportation. It's a completely different subject. Like, I've traveled across the world, and there's public transportation in rural communities everywhere, from Africa to Europe to Asia. It's not necessarily an urban issue, It's just again issue of political will and establishing the resources that are necessary to invest in having that infrastructure.
Well, it comes down to the resources. I mean, especially when you talk about a rural area like Hawaii. I mean, we only have so much money. We rely on federal funds, but then take for example the rail project on Oahu. I mean, how would you feel if you was in Congress right now and the Hawaii delegation is asking you to keep sending the money, 700 million or whatever the heck it is, but the goalpost keeps moving, and the price tag keeps rising, and it's not because of climate change; it's because of poor management, right? At some point, we as the communities, the leaders in whether it's at the local level, state level, we need to do our share. If we're going to continue to ask Congress for funds, I mean, it's you got to perform. The states truly got to perform, and the counties to make sure that those funds are utilized properly and effectively and efficiently, and that it's not just I don't even know honest. Oh, did we lose him?
Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I got you back.
Sorry about that.
I don't even know if the rail project on Oahu is even is. I think it might even be obsolete. Um, the technology, the concrete pillars are cracking, and now it's they moved the goalposts again back down to 2023. I mean, at some point, the state's got to be able to properly manage the funds that Congress allocates. But it will take a very strong, committed Congress to make sure that these commitments are met.
I agree, like particularly for the rail project. I would want to see, of course, the rail project isn't in this district that I'm running in. So the rail project is in Congressional District 1, which is essentially urban Honolulu. Congressional District 2 is rural Oahu and all of the neighbor islands. But nevertheless, being a member of Hawaii's delegation to Congress, I'd want to see, okay, what are the lessons learned from the mistakes that have been made previously, and the funding that has been wasted previously, and how are we going to ensure that with the additional funding you're going to be able to reach the objectives to complete the project, to either get it to Ala Moana or get it to UH or get it to Waikiki. And I haven't seen that. I think one of sort of the big failures in this project is that HART was created as sort of a separate entity from the City and Council of Honolulu, and the HART's not elected. So the HART stands for the Honolulu Authority for Rapid Transit, and HART's not elected. It was essentially created by the City and Council to distance the City and Council from the rail project, and that way people sitting on the City Council on Oahu can say, oh, that's not my fault, that's HART's fault. And so they're able to push themselves away from the failure of the project. So I think HART needs to be disbanded, and that the City Council needs to lead it directly. And that way the people on the City Council are much more invested for oversight. So I would want to see certain things like that proposed. But it's a very unfortunate example. I think it's the most expensive public infrastructure project per capita in the history of humanity at this point. It's just a very, very unfortunate example of government incompetence. It seems to be part corruption, but also especially government incompetence.
Cannot disagree with you there, my friend. Yeah, we got about 10 minutes left. I did want to give you an opportunity to share whatever's on your heart. We got 46 live viewers right now, but I can assure you that by tomorrow morning we'll have about 500. A lot of people will see this. There's still a lot of people that have not voted. I know a lot of people have, but just share why you believe any of our villagers that haven't voted yet. I already saw two people say that they're voting for you based on what they've heard. But what's your last pitch before we sign off as far as why we should consider voting for you for CD2?
Yeah, so I would just say if you're frustrated at the way things are going, you're not alone. You're not imagining the various crises that we have in the state. You're not imagining the level of homelessness that we have. You're not imagining the economic situation that you're in. These are all real things, and people across the state are hungry for change. We mentioned at the beginning of the call sort of frustrations in working with the media establishment. I've also had frustrations during this campaign in working with the political establishment in the state. But in talking with individual voters and voices in the community, it's been nothing but an enjoyable experience. And talking with ordinary people across Hawaii, from the Big Island to Kauai to Maui to the rural areas here on Oahu. And so I would just realize that you're not alone, and do your research for the candidates, because like we were speaking of in the beginning, a mainland donor who's funding $1 million to a super PAC clearly does not have your best interest at heart. So make sure when you get your ballot in the mail, if you haven't voted yet, not only for this race, but for every race, to take time to go through and to research the candidates. Key elements of our campaign is that we're not taking corporate money. We're not taking special interest money. We're fully powered by small dollar donations from individuals. And as well, we're running on a very clear progressive policy platform that I have listed on my website. So on my website, there's about 60 policies that I would be fighting for if elected in Congress. That's one of the unique elements of our campaign in this race, is that we actually list what we're going to be fighting for, which you think every politician should do, but very few of them do. And if they don't, you should be especially wary, regardless of what seat they're running for, regardless of what race they're running for. If you listen to a politician for more than 5 minutes and you don't know what they're about, you don't know what they're going to be doing if elected, or if they are elected, what they are doing, that is a cause of concern. So we list out all of our policies on our website. Our 5 big policies are establishing universal health care through Medicare for all, ensuring that our islands remain habitable by passing a Green New Deal, transitioning to peaceful foreign diplomacy by ending foreign wars and bringing our troops home, ensuring that Social Security remains solvent by passing a wealth tax on the wealthiest of Americans, and then also protecting and expanding unions by passing the PRO Act. So if you agree with those policies, I would be very appreciative of your support. You're also welcome to reach out to us. You can give our campaign a call or give our campaign an email. Both of those are listed on our website. We're happy to take those, and typically it's me who responds or me who picks up right away.
And what is your website?
So it's just brendanschultz.com. My first name is spelled Brendan. My last name Schultz. If you Google Brendan Schultz Congress, it should be one of the first few things that comes up.
Yeah, don't Google Brendan Schwartz, because it ain't gonna pop up. I was trying to bring up your website before we went on. I'm like, what the heck? What the heck? I looked up the other day and it came right up on the top, and then I obviously realized during the show why, because I typed in Schwartz. Oh my gosh! But anyway,
Another funny thing is that my name, when written down, looks extraordinarily similar to Brian Schatz, who's one of our who's one of our U.S. senators. It's like it confuses a lot of people. So just realize I'm a completely different person. Obviously, I like looking at us than him.
well, it's been awesome. I definitely, regardless of the outcome of the election, man, I definitely want to keep you on the Rolodeck to have you come back often, because humanitarian aid, your work that when I went to your website, and you're just an amazing guy. Just committed your life now to helping others, not just here but across the world. And thank you for doing that. Just what an experience, though, to be able to see all these different countries and how they operate, and uh, that's just amazing. So thank you for doing that.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. It's definitely, I mean, again, like many life experiences like this campaign, like all of the experiences overseas, it's been truly an honor in many ways. It's great to serve others, but also learning everything I've learned in the process, and being sort of representative of the community is very, very pleasurable. It's a very enjoyable experience.
Well, Brendan, thank you again. Thank you for sharing this hour with us. We wish you the best of luck. Keep working hard, folks. www.brendanschultz.com. Go check it out. Shoot him an email. Give him a buzz if you have more questions. Yeah, people are saying you're kind of smart.
I appreciate that.
Yeah,
That's very
yeah. No,
kind of
it's
people.
it's kind of refreshing when people actually have experiences and personal knowledge of what's going on. So
Yeah.
you have a safe weekend, Brandon. And again, best of luck next week already. My gosh, 1 week from tomorrow.
Yeah, yeah. I've enjoyed the campaign, but I'm looking forward to next Saturday. Um, it's been
I
a
know the
great
feeling,
experience.
man.
Yeah, yeah. But thank you so much for having me on. Happy Aloha Friday and enjoy your weekend.
All right, thank you. All right, villagers, you guys have a super duper duper weekend. We'll see you guys next week. You guys stay safe, take care, God bless. We love you guys.
Sounds good.
Aloha.